human zoo.
3 men assassinated with pump-action shotguns.
This was drugs-related, and it was a professional job.
All 3 men were shot through the head at point-blank range.
The 3 dead men were well known in the drugs underworld.
The 3 victims were identified as Pat Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. All 3 were known criminals believed to have been involved in drugs.
Dealing in drugs is often the province of the double cross, the sting and the double deal.
The killings have all the hallmarks of a gangland murder.
We all know how the movie ended. 3 men executed in a Range Rover down a quiet farm track. A crime so brutal, it burned itself into British gangland history. Films have been made, books have been written, podcasts have speculated. But beyond the myths, the legends, and the Hollywood-style retellings, what's the truth? For the first time, using cutting-edge AI technology, alongside archival footage, we're bringing that story to life in a way never done before. We know the psychotic, drug-fueled madman from the films, but who was Pat Tate before the Essex Boys? Before the bullets, before the infamy? The real story starts long before the blood-soaked ending, and it's darker than you think. Episode 1. Pat Tate, before the Essex Boys. To understand Pat Tate's story, you have to understand Basildon, the town that raised him. By the 1970s, Basildon was a new town, part of a government plan to move London's overcrowded working-class families to fresh developments in Essex. On the surface, it was supposed to be a suburban utopia. Clean streets, decent housing, a place for young families to start over. But underneath that promise was something much darker. The town quickly became a breeding ground for crime. The high-rises and council estates filled up with disaffected youth, unemployment, and a rising drug problem. In many ways, Basildon was a time bomb waiting to go off, and Pat Tate would be one of the first to light the fuse. Born into chaos, a tumultuous beginning. His mother, Marie, and his father, Terry Tate, were still teenagers when Marie became pregnant. At just 18 years old, Terry married Marie after falling pregnant with Pat in 1958. In those days, having children out of wedlock was a no-no, and they had no choice but to tie the knot. 2 years later, Pat's younger brother Russell arrived. Pat grew up in a world where survival meant being the toughest in the room. He wasn't just a big lad, he was huge. By his teens, he was already towering over most grown men, with a reputation for solving problems with his fists. He stood at 6'4" and 18 stone. Pat was never particularly smart or ambitious in the traditional sense. School was a waste of time, and he had no interest in a regular job. What he did have was charisma, fearlessness, and a complete disregard for authority. He started small. Petty theft, street fights, protection rackets. But by the early 1980s, he had his eyes on something bigger. He loved the limelight, he loved fame, and he even recorded this fight scene for an unreleased movie in the early 80s. The 1980s were a wild time in Essex. Drugs were flowing, nightclubs were booming, and the underworld was expanding rapidly. London gangsters were branching out into the quieter suburbs, looking for new ground to control. Pat, already a well-known enforcer in Basildon, saw an opportunity. He started mixing in criminal circles, rubbing shoulders with gangsters, carrying out low-level commercial robberies, selling dodgy used motors, and building his network. He looked up to criminal legends Kenny Noy and Billy Blundell. One day, he dreamt of being a criminal kingpin himself. But in the 70s and 80s, Pat wasn't the lunatic he would become later on, after getting hooked on H. He was affable, charismatic. Some would even call him a lovable rogue. He was loved by many, hated by few, but known by all. He was fast becoming a face in Basildon, and his size and reputation made him a perfect enforcer. And soon, people in Basildon would respect and fear the name Pat Tate. He wanted power, respect, and most of all, money. He wanted the shiny things in life, and he wasn't afraid to take what he wanted at any cost. By the late 1980s, Tate was working his way up the criminal ladder, even if he was still very much a local face. His temper would be his greatest weakness, and it was about to land him in serious trouble. One night, after a weekend of clubbing and chemical-induced chaos, Tate and his crew went to Basildon's Happy Eater restaurant. What should have been a simple meal turned into a disaster. A disagreement over the bill escalated into full-blown violence. Tate attacked the cashier, beat them senseless, and emptied the till before storming out. The attack was brutal and reckless. Police were called, and within hours, Tate was arrested. But he wasn't going down quietly. What came next propelled him into the Premier League of the criminal underworld in Essex. One minute he was a local face, the next his mug was splattered over every newspaper in Britain and beyond. While awaiting trial at Billericay Magistrates Court, Tate did something straight out of a Hollywood film. He punched out the prison officer guarding him, sprinted through the courthouse, and leapt through a window. Waiting outside was a 1000cc Honda motorbike, revving its engine. Tate jumped on the back, and within seconds, he was gone. Blasting through the streets of Essex at 140 miles per hour, the escape was brazen, reckless, and completely humiliating for the police. The word on the street was that Billy Blundell was behind the daring escape. For most criminals, an escape like this would be a nightmare, a guarantee of relentless police attention. But for Pat, it was the best thing that could have happened. Overnight, he went from local thug to underworld legend. For 10 months, Pat Tate was on the run. But instead of hiding in some dingy safe house, he was living it up. He's even said to have had his brother and girlfriend out there visiting him. Tate had joined the ranks of the Costa del Crime. He crossed the border into Gibraltar, a British overseas territory. The moment he did, his luck ran out. The authorities were waiting. Within hours he was in cuffs. The infamous fugitive was caught, and his capture was broadcast across the country. He was no longer small fry. He was the giant lunatic who had punched his way out of custody and had stuck it to authorities. Pat Tate, the man who had humiliated British police, was now being dragged back to the UK. He had cheated the system once, but now he was about to face the full weight of justice. What came next was more violent, more drug-fueled, and more chaotic than anything that came before. A downward spiral that would ultimately lead to the brutal Essex Boys or Rettendon murders of 1995. Pat would arrive back in Britain in chains. He would be sentenced for the robbery and the escape. But it is here that the infamous story of Pat Tate would take a dark turn for the worst. If you enjoyed this video, why not give us a follow, like and share the video.
Human Zoo.